Every choice has a consequence. Not always a big one, or a seen one, or the expected one, but it has a consequence. When we lift weights, we get sore. When we play with fire, we get burned. When we eat beans, you get the point. Which is why, when we make a big choice with big consequences, we like to make sure that we take our time with it. We like to weigh the pros and cons, to consider the repercussions, to talk with friends, to get a vehicle history report, because we know that if we jump too quickly into a big decision with potentially big consequences, things can go wrong. Sure, sometimes we can make a bad choice and it can still work out for the best, just as we can have all the time in the world and still make a poor choice. But all things being equal, we like to take our time with the big choices in life. We like to make good choices. Unfortunately, not every choice in life comes with as much time as we need to make it. The truth is, throughout our lives, there are many choices with big consequences that we are forced to make quickly. And in those moments, our best hope is that we know ourselves well enough to make the best choice possible in the time given. Our hope is that we've already done the hard work to figure out what is important to us, what we value, and how we want to live, so that when we are presented with a difficult choice, no matter the time, we have some means of making it. But friends, the good news is that no matter the choice, or the time that we take to make it, by the grace of God, we don't make it alone. The good news is that God is present with us no matter the choice we make. And so, with that confidence today, on this, the 5th Sunday after Epiphany, as we continue our pre-Lenten stroll through the Gospel of Mark, we choose to stop for a moment so that we might hear a story of Jesus and a choice he had to make. Our story today, from the 1st chapter of Mark's Gospel, is likely a familiar one. A man with leprosy approaches Jesus and says, "If you choose, you can make me clean." If you choose, you can make me clean. Now, up until this point in Mark's Gospel, Jesus has taught in the synagogue, cast out demons, and healed people of other unnamed ills. Last week, a few verses before our story today, we even heard of Jesus touching a woman on the Sabbath who was not related to him in order to heal her, to take her fever away. In other words, even though we're still only a few chapters into Mark's Gospel, Jesus has already established some patterns of behavior that give us some clue as to what his choice might be in a situation like this. But let's be clear. It was an actual choice. As obvious as his response might be to those of us who think we know Jesus pretty well, we should never forget that the choice he made was his own. That he had a choice for how he was going to live his life. The truth is, Jesus, like us, had been given freedom to live in the world, which meant that his choices were his own. It was not predetermined exactly the path that he would follow or how he would get there. No, although he knew he didn't choose alone, the choice was his. And as he began that slow and steady walk from nativity to cross, we can't forget that he was not forced or coerced, but that he made his own choice. And fortunately for us, and for the man standing in front of him in our story today, Jesus knew both who he was and what he valued, and as a result was able to make a choice quickly. And so today, although there are many we choose values of inclusion, of justice, and of action. Jesus valued inclusion. The man who came to Jesus was a leper, or had some skin disease, a potentially contagious skin disease, which meant that he was not supposed to be around healthy people. He was supposed to remain on the outskirts of town where he would not risk infecting others. In fact, any time people came around him, he was supposed to yell, "Unclean! Unclean!" It's hard to picture a more isolating existence. He was physically and ritually unclean, and as a result had no connection to others. Now granted, leprosy is not something that our culture struggles with frequently, but we certainly know what it's like to set someone on the edge of society and pray that they stay there. We know what it's like to see those who are different than us and pray that they will not come near us, or that we won't have to include them in the sheep we are meant to feed. But friends, we also know that the one we are called to follow valued inclusion. Not just of the elites or of the beautiful, not just of the people who looked like him or with whom he was comfortable, but everyone. The truth is, Jesus, from the beginning of his ministry to the end, included. We might not know a heck of a lot about Jesus, but we do know that when there was a doubt, Jesus erred on the side of inclusion. Friends, Jesus included. Not because he thought it was a nice thing to do, because he recognized who we are at our core. He recognized that for all of those things that divide us, clean and unclean, male and female, gay and straight, black and white, poor and rich, whole and broken, they are only secondary to what is at our core, which is that we are all, like it or not, children of God. Which brings us to our second value. Jesus valued justice. To include someone as a child of God is one thing. To treat them like it is another. To be clear, both parts are hard. Inclusion and justice are definitely cousins, but in this moment, Jesus must have recognized that justice was at stake in his choice. He must have recognized that years of systematic exclusion and injustice had led this man to a desperate act. And to be clear, it was a desperate act. We have no record of him shouting that he was unclean as he approached Jesus, or even that he made it clear he had an ailment, though one might think it might have been obvious. And frankly, we don't have a plan for him if Jesus had chosen not to help him. The point is, like so many who are forced to live in unjust circumstances, eventually he reached a breaking point. He lashed out. The man approaches Jesus in the midst of a crowd without announcing his uncleanliness and begs for justice. If you choose, you can make me clean. If you choose, you can make me clean. Friends, justice requires choice. And in that moment, we're told that Jesus was moved with pity. And that might very well be the case. But another translation is that he became angry. Jesus became angry. He saw this man suffering and became angry. And friends, that makes even more sense. After all, we know it's difficult for a loving person to be confronted with true injustice and not be at least a little angry. Friends, we live in a society that often speaks about justice, but more often fails to see the ways that we systematically prevent it from flourishing. If If we truly lived in a just society, we wouldn't have the disparity between the rich and the poor that we do. We wouldn't pay for our schools out of the pockets of the poor people who live around them. We wouldn't be comfortable with the fact that more college-age African-American men occupy our country's prisons than our schools. Friends, justice requires choice. And it's one of the most important ways that we enact our faith. It's part of what it means to love. If we believe that everyone is included as a child of God, then we have a responsibility to work for a world that actually treats people like it. Jesus challenged us in our understandings of justice to go beyond providing people with the opportunity to flourish, to walking alongside them until they do. It's a far cry from God helps those who help themselves. Which brings us to our last value for the day. Jesus valued action. The really good thing about Jesus is that he didn't stop at anger. But he used his anger as a catalyst for action. As Augustine said, hope has two beautiful daughters, anger and courage. The truth is, when this man approached Jesus, he could have done any number of things. Jesus could have told him to go away and come back at another time. He could have weighed the consequences and recognized that to touch this man would have made him unclean and jeopardized his future ministry. But he didn't do that. He couldn't do that because he didn't just value inclusion and justice, but he also valued action. Yes, we also value action, but if we're honest, we struggle with it. We recognize that we're called to reach out to people in love, but when it comes down to it, we often fail to act. We need only reflect on the number of times we have considered picking up the phone or inviting someone to share a meal with us or writing a note against the times we have actually done it. But fortunately for us and for this man, Jesus went beyond valuing inclusion and justice and action to actually living them. When the man approached Jesus and said, "If you choose, you can make me clean," Jesus reached out his hand, touched the man, and said, "I do choose. Be made clean." It's hard to imagine a simpler interaction. One who is in need of healing, of wholeness, of being welcomed back into society, approaches another who can offer those things and states his desire. "If you choose, you can make me clean." And the other responds by reaching out his hand and saying simply, "I do choose. Be made clean." And at once, the leprosy is said to have left him, and he was made clean. Now, it would be nice if this story ended with the man becoming a faithful disciple of Jesus, listening to what Jesus said and doing as he was told. But as we know from our own actions in the world, things rarely work out exactly as we expect them to. Once the man is healed, Jesus says to him, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priests, and offer for your cleansing what Moses commanded as a testimony to them." In other words, Jesus asks him to do two basic things. One is to go and do the ritual cleansing so that he might freely and openly live in the world again, having been declared clean by the religious authorities. And second is not to speak about this to anyone. But the man ignores both. He bypasses the priests altogether. And we are told in the text that he went out and began to proclaim it freely and to spread the word so that Jesus could no longer go into town openly, but stay out in the country. Now, we could take the fact that Jesus couldn't go into a town openly as a testament to his growing popularity, and maybe that was the case, but there is another possibility. You see, it could be that because he was now so widely known to have touched an unclean person, he was now relegated to the outskirts of town, and people had to come to him. Either way, he had to live the consequences of his choice. The truth is, friends, we will never be able to anticipate exactly the consequences that our choices will have. We may make the most faithful choice possible we can, in keeping with our core values, and things might still work out poorly. As a people of faith, we have no guarantees that life will be peachy keen. In fact, we know it probably won't. The good news of our faith is that no matter where we find ourselves on the other side of our choices, by the grace of God, we know we won't be